am very happy to speak today with Jacek Olczak, CEO of Philip Morris International, typically shortened to PMI. PMI has more than 80,000 employees worldwide, is publicly listed, and has a market capitalization of almost $250 billion. So it's big business. And of course, PMI is widely known as a cigarette company, which makes sense because it owns 5 of the world's 15 best-selling international brands, including the iconic #1 Marlboro. But, and as some of you may not know, PMI today is deriving about 40% of its revenues from smoke-free products. Not tobacco-free, but smoke-free products. And that's 40% is up from 24% in 2020 and up from almost 0 10 years ago. The ambition is to grow this percentage of revenues coming from smoke-free products to about 2/3 by 2030. PMI today presents itself as a leading international consumer goods company and as the first international consumer goods company making tobacco products to commit to, and I quote, a smoke-free future, encouraging those adults who would otherwise continue to smoke to switch to better alternatives. Now, we will discuss this transformation with Jacek, including how they're going about it and what challenges the company faced and is still facing. Jacek himself grew up in communist Poland. He studied economics in Łódź before starting his career in an accountancy firm in London. Relatively soon thereafter, and a bit more than 30 years ago, he joined PMI, where he's had many roles over the years, including president of the EU region, then CFO, then COO, and finally CEO in May 2021. Jacek, a warm welcome to you, and thank you for coming to IMD today to have this dialogue with me.
Always pleasure to be with IMD.
Thank you. Jacek, let's start maybe with a brief history. So the company originated in London, 1847, but PMI itself was established in 1987 as an operating company of Philip Morris Companies, was the name of the organization. In 2003, Philip Morris Companies changed its name to Altria Group. And then in 2008, PMI was spun off from Altria and became a separately listed entity. At the same time, Kraft was also spun off. What was the reasoning at the time?
Yeah, conglomerate discount.
Okay.
I think there was a moment when the stock market starts having a challenge in, putting a proper value on the different parts of a business. And usually it results that the common denominator goes too low. And therefore, in order to release the shareholder value, it's for some companies, it's better to separate its parts. So this was very much when the tobacco was traded at that time at a significant discount.
Right.
So Kraft couldn't realize its value. I mean, a good proof that the decisions made 2008 and a few years before, where all the companies were being spun off, is if you look at the valuation of these individual parts today versus the starting point.
Okay.
So we created, Philip Morris has created quite a lot of shareholder value by actually spinning off the assets, giving them the right to having its own strategy, focus, etc.
Understood. Now, 2016, your CEO at the time, André Calantzopoulos, announced a new purpose for the company. And here I need to quote it directly: to deliver a smoke-free future by focusing its resources on developing, scientifically substantiating, and responsibly commercializing smoke-free products that are less harmful than smoking, with the aim of completely replacing cigarettes as soon as possible. So this is 2016. At the time, you were the company's CFO and hence very much a part of the executive committee's decision. How did you guys come up with this announcement, which, it should be said, was very much a first for the industry?
Yeah, so the announcement of the idea was in our minds for quite a few years before.
Okay.
These announcements, which you quoted very precisely, very accurately, required quite a few months of waiting every word and the comma and the structure.
Okay.
And it has the and each of these parts has the meaning. Just to start with, whether we like it or not, smokers love smoking. So despite all the effort in a public health domain, and you're talking, significant marketing restrictions, promotional restrictions, the whole awareness campaigning about the risk of smoking, despite the high taxes, higher prices, despite the expelling essentially smokers from a civic society, smokers do continue smoking.
And as a full disclosure, my wife is one of those. She's a responsible adult, she's raised 3 children, she votes, and she has made a very conscious decision to continue smoking, and she alternates between 2 of your products.
Yeah, so she should quit or she should switch. I mean, that's my short versions of the best advice I can give now. But so one of the problems which we have identified that despite all of this effort, smoking will continue.
Yeah.
Okay, so we also know that the humans most likely are not the best in assessing the risks. So despite the fact that you are fully aware about the risk of smoking, people still continue to smoke, despite the fact that the risk can be very severe and they do materialize. Then the question somebody put on the table was, okay, if smokers will continue to smoke, nobody would like to live with the consequences of smoking. Is this the way that we can develop the product which on the one hand gives the similar satisfaction, whatever is the definition of a satisfaction as cigarettes, but that they significantly reduce risk? That's the first part of a statement. Second is scientifically substantiated. This was not supposed to be something which improves the trajectory of the harm reduction compared to cigarette smoking, on the fringes of urges, but something which materially has the chances of reducing the health impact. If you will talk to many toxicologists, they will tell you that reductions in exposure to any harmful substance by more than 50%, so by half, has the very high chances of reducing the final outcomes, which is the disease. We have put for ourselves the standard at that time that will not go to the market if we reduce the exposure to the harmful toxicants which you can find in a cigarette smoke by less than 75%. So we increase the bar, put the bar higher.
So in other words, it's not marginal.
No,
it's a major
marginal.
breakthrough.
No, it's actually a major breakthrough. The final products which we have today in the market, that anywhere in the 90-95+% reduction of all the harmful toxicants which you can find in the smoke, including carcinogens and many others. Obviously, the best for a smoker is to quit smoking. But we know, as I said at the beginning, smokers love smoking, and therefore, despite the fact that they know everything about the risk associated with smoking, they don't. Some do, many don't. So this is how we built the Research and Development Center in Neuchâtel, the famous Cube. Hiring the first scientists was extremely difficult because that essentially meant for them that they are being expelled from the scientific
mainstream
community.
Scientific community.
Exactly, because you collaborate with tobacco companies, etc. Okay, fast forward, many years later, today is not an issue. So this was why we put emphasis in the statements that these products will go to the market as long as there is a very objective, strong science to demonstrate that these products are significantly better alternative than smoking.
And today, this has been approved by the FDA.
This has been authorized by FDA. The whole scientific evidence behind this product has been reviewed by many other similar to FDA authorities in other countries. So the science is subject to the verification, scrutiny, etc. And I think the conclusions are all pointing into the same direction. For those who won't quit or can't quit or don't quit, the best solution is to switch, and you're reducing significantly the exposure to all the bad stuff which you find in the tobacco smoke. And the third part of that statement was we're trying to bring this at that time. We're trying to bring this product to the market in addition to cigarettes, or as the replacement to cigarettes. And I think a very deliberate decision at the time was the only way we should do it is to replace cigarettes. Because essentially confronted with once you have a scientific substantiations, you're confronted with one fact. You know that you have one product which is significantly better than the other product. So what's the purpose of keep on investing and promoting the other products, which I think is good for smokers, for the consumers, for the public at large, for the company to move into these products. Later on, that statement was the guiding principles, how we allocate the resources, how we drastically de-invest the cigarettes, combustible cigarettes, and pull all available resources behind R&D, science, product development, and commercialization of the new products.
How controversial was this decision internally? Was there an enormous alignment through the company, or were some people more comfortable than others?
I mean, obviously, you had people who were more skeptical about this whole thing, who had the doubts, but this is always that moment when the company is as strong as its leadership, and I think we've been very gifted that the leadership, board, CEOs, and a few other execs at that time had a common belief that we can change the world and we can actually address the problem of smoking. And the rest is the change management, right? So you communicate, you talk. We have communicated a lot. I mean, somebody at that time told me that there is essentially zero risk of over-communication. I thought it is blah, blah, empty statement, but I learned the hard way that there is a significant risk of under-communication, right, but there is actually no risk of over-communication. So we spend a lot of time of keeping every of our 80,000 plus employees on board, despite the fact that some of them were still very much in a combustible business, cigarettes business, and those which are, moving into new business. I mean, from today's perspective, when, we roll out these products to the 100 markets, okay, everyone sees this, that we're not leaving any of our companies behind or every of the markets behind. For the last 10 years, we haven't built any combustible factories, but we opened 16 manufacturing centers for the smoke-free products. Many of these manufacturing centers are being opened on the back of the combustible centers. There is a lot of reskilling, retraining of our, engineers, technicians, and so on. There's a lot of similarities between the two products when it comes to processes from manufacturing operations perspective. I mean, today is much easier. Today you will not find anybody doubting that it was the right direction.
There was also, if I remember well, a certain amount of pain, right? You had some reduction of staffing in some areas, I guess also in order to make room for other folks.
Yeah, there is the pain. I mean, always, I guess, when you're doing something new and sizable, important, something big, there is a degree of pain. There is actually one of our long-lasting investors. His name is Tom Russo. He's very successfully. He's a investment office for many years. He coined, and I think he borrowed this from Warren Buffett. One of them has inspired each other. And he coined the term of a capacity to suffer. And if the companies are to do the, pivotal change in the strategies, etc., if you don't have this capacity to suffer, which is withhold the pressure of the short term versus long term, take the risk, big risk, going into new versus continuing with the old, which still, can yield the good returns, good results. This is what differentiates great company from a good company. So I think Philip Morris has demonstrated that we do have, and we will have a capacity to suffer.
Looking at PMI today, almost 10 years after this new purpose came up, as I said earlier, about 40% of your revenues come from smoke-free products. That's a bit more than 40 million adults all over the world using these smoke-free products. And in more than 20 markets, actually, smoke-free products generate more than 50% of your revenues. Now, as I was preparing for this, it seems to me that you're running three different businesses. A burning tobacco cigarette business, a smoke-free business that has three major components, and we'll get to this. And then there's a completely different set of activities that sometimes are referred to as beyond nicotine, and sometimes are referred to under the umbrella health and wellness. Is that fair, these three different buckets?
Yeah, it's absolutely fair. The combustible business, essentially, I think these decisions which I described earlier, we didn't want to do it in addition to, but as a replacement of, that was obviously supported by the massive resource allocations, which was to accelerate the smoke-free transition. It was up to management to take the R&D money, commercial money, and move it behind the smoke-free. 99% of our R&D spent today is behind the smoke-free products. So it's a massive allocation of resources which accelerate the transitions, which we wouldn't be able, again, to do if we were treating these businesses as the separate businesses. And the Beyond Nicotine business is the play on the capabilities which we have developed internally,
Right.
which definitely have been excelling in building the brands. Hence, as you notice in your opening remarks, I mean, we are the house of the most iconic brands, including Marlboro, so we know how to do that from a marketing perspective, brand building. We have added during the smoke-free transformation all the capabilities about the product development, including electronics, product assessment. So, it's a lot of life science capabilities, which we didn't have before. And essentially, it's looking at all of these capabilities, saying, do we have enough to start playing in another territory? So there is a corridor of what we think Philip Morris can do in addition to just solving the problem of smoking, which is under this umbrella of Beyond Nicotine. This is more into the wellness, therapeutics, but very much focused around the certain skills or enhancements of skills or capabilities, if you like, of the human. So the whole transformation of a smoke-free is very well accepted, especially by the investors. I mean, the consumers, obviously, but very much by investors. You see this in a delta or difference in evaluation of Philip Morris versus other tobacco companies. I mean, some people asking questions, are we still the tobacco company? Maybe we are just the CPG type of a company with the defined territories. But this is very exciting.
So let's get back to the Beyond Nicotine. Briefly, cigarette business, still 60% of your revenues. But did I get this right? Lower profitability than smoke-free products?
Yes, I mean, the product would have the better revenue per unit, and the better gross margin per unit than the cigarettes, partially because the difference in the taxations, as many governments are recognizing the lower impact, negative impact gonna have a positive impact in the harm reduction. So therefore, these products enjoy the lower taxations, quite rightly, because indirect taxations have this ability to stimulate demand in the right directions. Second is obviously now we operate at scale. Remember, this is a 10 or 11 years since we commercialized this product, and as the first mover, we obviously take the lion's share of the economy of scale benefits, right? I mean, IQOS today, heat-not-burn proposition, is in a unit volume of 150 plus billion. You could build almost a very sizable cigarette company based on these volumes, right, on a global basis. So the product is attractive from the margin perspective, and obviously is also attractive from the geographical mix, okay? In a sense that, we started in the most challenging environments, which is the developed countries. We started in Japan, Italy, okay, Western Europe, European Union, etc. We're going to developing countries that obviously also have a geographical mix margin impact on these products. But the whole transformation is very profitable. And again, this is very much recognized in today's valuation of the company if you compare Philip Morris International to all our tobacco companies. But there is one thing which I would like to mention. Could we do better or more? That already 10 years into this transformations, our smoke-free revenues are higher, like 50% or 60%.
Yep.
And obviously, based on today's knowledge, there are a few things internally which, you could do faster, differently, etc. I mean, that's obvious. But I think the one thing which we haven't taken into considerations in the very beginning is opposition from regulators in a certain place. So we ended up in a situations today that, Philip Morris operates in 160 markets. Smoke-free products are only in 100 markets. The question is why I'm not in the remaining 60 markets. And we are not in this remaining 60 markets for one fundamental reason. The cigarettes are being allowed by the legislation, while the smoke-free products are being banned. And this is when I think one thing which didn't cross our mind at the very beginning of a transformation, that despite the fact that we'll invest only into the scientifically substantiated products, so we're very much on the rational part of the problem solving, we completely underestimated irrational part of the problem solving. Having said so, every year we're making a progress. So, we recently opened Taiwan, like a tiny country, but also was stuck a little bit in the past that, cigarettes were allowed, not the smoke-free products. I think it's gonna come. It's regrettable is that it takes us so much time to accept that this actually solves the problem.
In the meantime, there's 1.3 billion smokers of cigarettes globally, and some parts of the world are still growing. Middle East and Africa, Southeast Asia, and in terms of countries, places like Indonesia, Egypt, Thailand, and Turkey. And in those markets, PMI is fighting for market share, right, with other cigarette manufacturers. How do you reconcile this? We want to get out of it, but in some parts of the world, we're still fighting for market share.
Actually, we not fight for the market share. We fight for maintaining the value. So we obviously, otherwise if we would be fighting for the market share, wouldn't allocate that much or reallocate that much of a commercial resources.
Okay.
So obviously the objective is not to give the market share for free to competition, but also don't fight for the growth of the category or growth of our share in that category, but maintaining what we call the fair share of the category, which is the component of maintaining the value creation there and the resources, because let's remember all the resources which we generate from a combustible business are continuously feeding the smoke-free business.
Right.
As we continue with the development and science behind the new products, and we had all the programs for the Beyond Nicotine, we just discussed, so obviously this is being financed by the cash flows coming from a combustible business.
I want to build on this because this is not unheard of in many other companies where you have one historical line of business which ends up being basically a bit of a cash cow, and here the growth comes from smoke-free products. Clearly, the purpose highlights we want to move in that direction. As you said earlier, almost all of the R&D investment is in that direction. Almost 75% of the commercial budget goes in that direction. How do you ensure that this unit does not completely lose its energy and its drive, right? Because they are the unloved child in many ways.
No, but they truly recognized as the equal member of the Philip Morris family. So it all starts with employees. I think, we are 80,000+ headcount company. Yeah. If you go to these parts which are only focusing today, as I mentioned, because of regulations very much on the combustible business, they will not say that they are not involved, that they are not taken care of, that they are left behind or anything of this nature. They know that their time will come, and they also will directly be able to support the smoke-free transformation. So this is not an issue. I think, this is one of the assets which we have created, this internal alignment behind the purpose, despite the fact that obviously you still have a combustible business, but with a different purpose than the smoke-free business.
So the value proposition is we're under-investing in your business, but you should feel good about the fact that you're funding the development of these new activities.
Absolutely, and there is also value in this this whole thing. Again, referring back to our initial decisions. Don't do it as the separate business, but do it as the one business.
Okay.
The two different lines of a product. Is that in all the markets when we are selling cigarettes, we have a faster route to the consumer. We have a faster route to the trade. And it's actually the capabilities which serve us very well the moment when we start offering the smoke-free products in a given geography to accelerate the growth. It's much easier for us to put a QR code on a pack of Marlboro, referring still smokers, go visit website of our smoke-free products, whether this is ZYN, the pouches, or whether this is IQOS, or this is electronic cigarettes. It helps, it shortens the path to the consumer. In the markets which I don't have a cigarette, which we don't have a cigarette business, how I can find the consumers? Right. Here at least we know. And we have no mercy in targeting our own combustible smokers with the information and the support in the transitions to smoke-free products.
Now, let's talk about the smoke-free business. Three major pillars. Two of them are non-tobacco related, and one of them, you've mentioned it, IQOS, which is heat but not burn. So tell us about IQOS, but tell us also about the other two.
Yeah, so the all three are meeting the criteria which I mentioned before. They significantly, but I mean very, very significantly reduce the exposure to all the bad stuff which you find in a cigarette smoke. They are not risk-free, but definitely they generate significantly less harm. Now, each of these products are offering different degree for a smoker of ability, if you like, to convert or to switch into these products. Okay. IQOS Heat Not Burn was developed with the principle of resembling as much as possible the ritual of smoking, okay, while obviously reducing the exposure. Hence, you have an electronic way of controlling the temperature profile so you don't trigger combustion, so you don't go into the danger zone, etc. It has the tobacco taste, some degree of a tobacco taste because it contains tobacco. The actual results from the marketplace confirm that IQOS has still today by far the highest abilities to switch permanently smokers to the alternative. And that's very important because we didn't want to go into some sort of a complicated, if you like, situations that I reduce my average smoking of a cigarettes by 3 or 4 cigarettes and I replace them with IQOS. Right. We knew that the real benefit will, to its maximum, be accrued to you if you fully switch to this product. And IQOS delivers on this one. And you have a rate of adoptions somewhere in the 70%. Okay. E-cigarettes at the time were offering you a rate of adoptions not even at the 30%. So
e-cigarette means no tobacco, but nicotine.
The nicotine liquid and some flavors. Then you have oral category, like a newest addition to our portfolio, nicotine pouches, which is completely different ritual. You don't have a hand-mouth movement. It's less visible, more discreet. It's a different way of absorbing a nicotine. It's not via inhalations. It's coming through your gums. These products have a very high potential, but we also know that the smoker's ability to adopt straight this product from a smoking ritual might take time. So at the end of the day, you need the all three because they have a different, giving consumers a different difficulty level or convenience level in a switching. And we also now learning that some consumers will try to mix any of those three. Depends on the moments of consumptions they have during a day. And I don't think that one of the categories will take it all, or product categories will take it all. I think at the end of the day, you will have a mix of these three categories. It might be different by country, by the history, by the geography, by culture, etc. All three categories will serve the consumers very well.
IQOS, Heat Not Burn. I think I read several numbers, but basically between 10 and $15 billion of investment over the years, with some initial relatively resounding failures in the sense that you develop a product and consumers don't really want it. This must have been difficult, right?
And we're learning all these things hard way. Okay, one of my reflection on where we are today, and this is undisputable success. I mean, IQOS is big and it keeps on growing. You have
we should say IQOS today is bigger than Marlboro.
It is. And there was already last 2 years. I think in 2023 we crossed the revenue line of a Marlboro with IQOS. A spectacular success, and it keeps on growing double digits per annum. So it's all great. Now, here is the story. If we would have today's knowledge in 2014, when we pressed the button for the first commercializations, we wouldn't launch the product. But we wouldn't know today what we know if we didn't press the button in 2014. So this is a classical catch-22, right. What you do. And I think ultimately we did the right decision. There's a lot of learning, which I think also sets us apart from many other participants in this market. There is not just the capability, which is the function of resources and the time to build this capability, but you put this capability at work, which means you have experience, which means you have a knowledge. And every new product development of every new idea, is this behind the Heat Not Burn or e-vape or the pouches, I think is a better developed, better prepared, because we have a ton of knowledge which we have accumulated over this 10 years. Now, as always, the past performance is not a guarantee of the future, for future success. Nobody is believing that the product which we have today in the market, that's it. Now for 50 years we'll be doing nothing than just selling the same product. So this is the continuous challenging. Can we do better? We put the consumer in the center. I mean, we have took a massive effort in converting this business or transforming this business from a classical B2B to B2B2C, when we own majority of the relations with the consumers, not necessarily transactions, but the relations. This allows to continuously feed the development machine, both in intangibles, the service which we provide to the consumers, but very much tangibles, which is the closed loop to the product development. So that machine goes.
Beyond nicotine, you are now operating these activities in a subsidiary called Aspeya, and we can come back on this. I looked at the website and it mentions 3 different types of activities: consumer health, and they said especially purposeful energy, cannabinoids, so I guess cannabis-based product, and inhaled therapeutics. How have you chosen these other areas? Clearly you have deep pockets, which is nice. But beyond the deep pockets, how did you identify here we have a right to win and here not?
Yeah, so there are some common denominators which are much higher than just the fact, as you described it, we have a deep pockets, right? Because deep pockets shouldn't allow you or create a...
Well, it helps, but it's not sufficient.
Well, it's nice to have the resources, right?
But it's not sufficient.
You need to have a purpose, and the purpose is not to build something which is completely unrelated or not related to the other parts of a PMI. So we always try to either you repurpose the capabilities, you play into your strength rather than you play into your weakness. We're not, for example, trying to add the business which could be characterized as classical pharma. This is not our aspirations. I don't think we have enough of the reasons or the arguments, if you like, to play there. But I think we can add a lot in the broad world of the wellness, therapeutics, etc. Yes, we're looking at the cannabinoids, but only on the medical side. We're not interested in anything which would impair your ability, for example, to judge. Because one of the things, and this is presumably topic for a separate conversations, one of the common denominator of a smoke-free products is that they contain nicotine. And as you know, opinions are divided, again, rational versus irrational world, what's the role of nicotine? The reality is nicotine is not is not the prime cause of a harm created by smoking. It's all the other compounds you have found in a tobacco smoke, etc. Nicotine itself is actually more on the axis of a satisfaction, right? And maybe enhancer of some certain cognitive skills, attention, etc., etc. But nicotine doesn't impair your ability to judge. You see, I can have a cigarette, which I shouldn't. I can have an IQOS, I can have a vape, I could use it, and I can drive the car. But there are many other substances which you shouldn't. Take alcohol, take certain of the hallucinogenic substances, etc. So this is not the territories which we want to go. Okay, I want to stay away from this one. Now, Aspeya, the newest name or label which we awarded to this unit, gave it to this unit, is the, as I said earlier, that's the longer play. We're fully aware that it's going to take a while until that thing's going to be substantial, especially in the group of PMIs, which has an over 40 billion revenues. It's going to take a time. But this common denominator of trying to see what do we know in terms of the product platforms. Our expertise is now in oral and inhalations, how we inhalations, how we can, based on our knowledge, further the development of certain solution to the existing needs of the consumers, which are now not defined as the smokers only, but the broader range of the consumers. We're adding also another thing, should we ever end into the substances of the products which should have a higher scrutiny when it comes to the marketing execution. We learn it from cigarettes, and it serves us extremely well in a smoke-free transformation, is ability to manage the accessibility to our products to the certain audiences. So obviously we're all in agreement that, kids underage people shouldn't smoke, kids underage people shouldn't have an access to smoke-free product. this is being translated into the certain set of the rules, procedures, processes in the company. The execution is very high. The level of execution is very good. So should we ever end up in a product that we need to control one audience or restrict one audience versus others, I think it's another ability which many other companies don't have.
Okay, so oral inhalation, we understand. Regulated marketing and regulated supply chains, we understand. Now, some of this is also, to what extent does society let you play in that field, right? A few years ago, you bought a company which was a UK asthma inhaler maker, Vectura Group, and you paid a very significant amount of money for it, and ultimately you had to divest it. Tell us about
this turned to be a classical example of irrationality versus rationality, because very shortly, days in the weeks after the acquisition, we closed the transaction, the number of the love letters which I received that how come Philip Morris, a tobacco company, is trying to enter pharma space.
So huge pushback.
Extreme pushback. This created a huge pressure on our employees at the Vectura, many of them being essentially expelled or banned from the presence on the scientific conferences, etc. So we had to regroup and change our idea that how we can have an access to certain Vectura capabilities, but or stop owning the asset, because we are too much of a liability for the potential value creation of Vectura. So it's a very sad story.
Jacek, you clearly are, I think, rightfully under pressure because of the negative effects of tobacco. There are other companies that are producing foods and or beverages that have by now relatively well documented negative impact on human health. Do you sometimes feel unfairly treated in the sense that you want to go sometimes, guys, yeah, okay, fine, you give us grief, but why don't you give more grief to these other folks?
Yeah, so look, I am no longer, unfortunately, 18 years old, right? So all my idealistic view of the world has been verified.
You know the world is not fair.
The world is not fair, definitely not in an automatic way. You need to earn it, but you may not still get it, but definitely you need to work. We knew that the cigarettes creates the problems. What we can do about unwinding the problem of cigarettes, or help addressing this problem. I think actually if each of us, every company would focus on its own product, services, and its own impact, rather than finding these excuses that relative to me, others are better or worse. I just stay on a course. But I have this, but life is not fair.
Okay, so yes, it's unfair in some ways, but it's not very helpful to focus on that. So instead, I try to focus on what I control, which is our own activities, and of course, moving our activities faster. Now, about 2 years ago, you and your leadership team somehow declared the transformation phase over. At least your CHRO explained this to us in a CHRO conference, and I thought that was an interesting idea, right? To say, look, obviously we will continue to evolve and transform, but now this is the new normal. So let's kind of declare victory on this phase and let's move to a new normal phase. And that came with a new PMI DNA, with values, and creating a special form of culture. Tell me about this.
Yeah, but the transformation, well, at least, to me, it's not the very, the very human language, right? If we go for a walk to the park or we go to the bar, most likely we will not use in our vocabulary the word transformation.
Okay.
So it just doesn't belong to the human conversation. Now, obviously, at the beginning when we announced the transformation, we also created a sort of a belief in some of the people the transformation has the beginning and has its end. I said, well, definitely it has its beginning, but doesn't have its end, because we will be continuously challenging ourselves, etc. So with Fred Patitucci, the Chief HR Officer, we come up with an idea, why don't we just convert it into the culture? And I think a transformation, or capture this in a form of a culture conversation within Philip Morris. And I think this transformation is more now under this one of the pillar of the culture, which is we are game changers.
Right.
Okay. But again,
So basically, let's define a culture that includes this continuous development and continuous reinvention. In my trade, we sometimes talk about institutionalizing dissatisfaction with the status quo, which even fewer people use than transformation. But so I guess what you're saying is okay, there's now a new PMI, and this PMI is based on we care, we are better together, we are game changers, and we are game changers basically says we're constantly evolving.
Yes.
Interesting. Absolutely. Now, as you know, Jacek, I'm a leadership professor. I have to ask you a few more personal questions about you. I think you're the first CEO I have a discussion with who was born and educated in a communist regime. You studied economics in Poland and you graduated around the time of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Then you moved to London, as I mentioned earlier. How has your pre-adulthood experiences influenced you and influenced the leader you have become?
Yeah, so when I started my studies, started my university, it was still very much the communist country.
Yeah.
So I think the change, the Berlin Wall, solidarity, etc., happened around the last year of my university studies. So I started in a communist, finished in the new economy, new order actually, new democratic order. How did it shape me? Look, if you're living under the regime, communist regime, you very quickly learn that you're on your own because you cannot rely for any institution. Institution being, if you work hard, you'll get the pension. If you do something, you will be recognized and rewarded, right? By the institutions, by the organizations, and that sort of the thing. So there is the reasons why.
So lack of trust in institutions.
Yeah, but lack of trust in institutions, which, you still have to live your life and you want to have a rewarding life. So you know that you're on your own, which is essentially you're an entrepreneur.
Okay,
it's your thinking, it's your skill, it's your hard work. Don't count on others. You have to, either you do it, nobody will do it for you. This is actually a common characteristics later on, which we found out in Philip Morris, that obviously the hunger for a success, the ability to deal with the unknown, new, etc., some of the entrepreneurship characteristics are coming from, not equally from from all parts of the world. The Central Eastern Europe, parts of Asia are being characterized by more having that sort of attribute.
Right, can-do attitude.
Versus the other people, the other groups would say, listen, do I have to do it? Okay, you owe me.
You've led Europe, and then you became global CFO, and then Chief Operating Officer, and then CEO. So different roles, different demands on you, different expectations from the world. What have you had to learn to do differently in these different roles?
Yes, I was privileged and lucky together, I guess, in Philip Morris that, obviously you have roles which are different by a job description, but the company will not, the management, the board will not limit you in performing your role broader than your job description.
Okay.
So if I look at, from the perspective of my today CEO role, how broad I was when I was CFO, or how broad I was when I was COO, when I got the promotion from a COO to CEO, my first question to myself was, what exactly will change?
Okay.
So you're running, you can contribute to the company, to the organization, not being restricted purely by the role definition, job descriptions, whatever you call it. It's actually up to you, right? So if you feel that you could create the value, make an impact, definitely this is a very impactful role in every organization. So you actually can be bigger than the role on the paper. So that's one thing. What I have learned one thing that I still have to learn. Okay, so this is like a curiosity, and yes, obviously your experience, your past knowledge, etc., serves you, but every month, every year, you're learning new things, especially if you're going into the new territories. So you need to be extremely open-minded. You will come to the situations that decisions you've made last year might be not valid this year, and you need to go and change your own views because you're learning new things, because you're gaining new experience, etc. If somebody would have told me that, towards closer towards the end of my career, I will still be in the learning phase rather than, discounting all the knowledge and experience I've gained, I would say, no. By definitions, I've learned for 20 years all this business, so last 10 years, I don't have to learn anything new. It's absolutely wrong. Actually, I am continuously learning.
And so you've mentioned curiosity. What else helps you to learn?
This was before, this statement was valid before we start talking about AI. You add AI to this whole thing, and there's like 100% guarantee you have to be open-minded and you have to be prepared for a continuous learning.
Okay. So you have to be willing to revise your views and your beliefs.
Yeah, but this starts with a mindset, right? That if you treat the change as an opportunity or treat the change as the threat.
Okay.
Somebody said that the EU is the Silicon Valley of regulations. And I think it's not about just the EU as a commission. I think if you look at the history, you had a little bit of, you will find out that there's a lot of great innovations which happened in Europe, but it was US outside Europe which actually make the impact out of these innovations. Okay, take the printed press, take the steam machine, take many others, transformative innovations. And usually we're taking to the US, and the US was making a big use of this one. I think it's like in Europe, when we see something new, our first thinking is how the things can go wrong. I don't know where this is coming from, but that's the situation. If you go especially to America, to the US, the first question is what I can achieve with this, what I can make out of this whole thing. And the regulations are a little bit later on, rather than my worries that the things can go wrong. Now, this is not a great mindset. If you look at everything new from the perspective of my black hat first, I think you're gonna maybe not kill the innovations, but you're voluntarily depriving yourself from making the best out of the innovations. And others may actually can run faster than you.
So don't resist change, but rather look at it and say, how do I make this work for us? How do I capitalize on this?
Every innovation creates the opportunities and creates the threats. But if your mindset is, I focus on the threats first, then by definition, you will not go into opportunities. And I think you should start with opportunities.
You and I studied together, hypothetically, 30-some years ago, and we meet again 30-some years later at an alumni meeting. Tell me one thing that over the years you've learned to do more, and one thing that over the years you've learned to do less.
I think I've learned that I continuously have to be reading. Reading meaning learning. That the moment that I should stop interest in, there is nothing new for me in the world, and I don't have to follow and remain my contacts and search the internet and scroll the internet, etc. I think that's the characteristic.
So the curiosity and the thirst for learning.
Yes. You need to be curious. It's almost like, look, this is what brought us up where we are today. When you were 5, 6, 7 years old,
right,
presumably you were a pain to your parents. They love you, okay? But there was a pain by asking this why? Yes. Why? Because you try to understand. This is how you were developing. And we thought that there's a certain moment, that's it. I have all the answers to my whys, and actually whys continue. And those people who challenge, they're actually better off.
One thing you've learned to do less.
Well, okay, this comes with the jobs, roles, and the day has a 24 hours, right? So however you divide it, you have a decent amount of sleep, the rest is your productive time. I think you start using your time as the only resource which will never be given back to you much more wisely. So it's the time with a family, it's the time with your hobby. I give you an example. I have only a couple, but the one important thing to me as the hobby is music, in whatever dimensions of the music. If I watch Netflix, this only will be music documentaries. Unlike some other people who like the comedy and drama and crime stories.
So you're
etc.
purposeful about how you use
You
your
use
time.
your time because that's the reflections which you develop, you learn over a period of time. Is that I can give you your budget back. You can have an opportunity to re-earn your capital, but I cannot give you time. So actually, the time is the most valuable resources you have, and therefore you try to put your time as your most expensive or valuable asset behind the things which really matter. I mean, how you prioritize your work. Do you want to spend the time on non-productive meetings, and do you want to spend the times which really on the things which generate the value?
You mentioned strategic clarity and allocating time to the things that matter most. Does that mean you say no a lot to activities? People, yeah?
Yes. Well, you do. On occasions, you wish you have even practiced that skill more. Sometimes you regret that your first, reaction was no, but you try to maybe give it a second chance. I mean, saying no, it's as good as saying yes. Okay, it's not negative. Okay, no. Look, in many projects, is pulling the plug on a project faster is better if you know that you go into the wrong direction. Because this is not again about the money. The worst one is that you wake up $25 million later, and 2.5 years later. I'd rather wake up $25 million later, but only 3 months later. Because if I burn the time and the money, I can get that money back, but I cannot get the time back. So it goes back to the same philosophy.
Last question, Jacek. You love your job because?
I love working with people and all consequences, positive and negative, of working with people. People make your life extremely exciting. We all humans, to the large degree, are unpredictable. So therefore, if you like that sort of excitement, you should have a jobs like mine.
Jacek, thank you very much for your time and for your insights, and best wishes of continued success.
Thank you very much for having me.